the ancient vampire, hidden inside a coffin that slowly spread disease, fear, and death wherever it went. The film begins by introducing a young girl named Ellen who lives in profound loneliness. In the middle of the night, she cries by herself while wishing for someone or something to come and keep her company. However, Ellen is not an ordinary girl. Since childhood, she has possessed a strange ability that allows her to sense things that other people cannot see or understand. Overwhelmed by despair and loneliness, Ellen unknowingly sends a call into the darkness using the power of her mind. Not long afterward, something actually answers her call. A mysterious voice echoes from an unknown place. The voice claims that it has been awakened from a long slumber and begins speaking to Ellen. It even tells her that she does not belong in this world and that one day it will return to take her away. Before she can fully understand what is happening, Ellen experiences an overwhelming sense of pleasure. But moments later, everything changes when a terrifying figure suddenly appears before her. Many years pass, and the story moves to the year 1838 in the city of Wisburg, Germany. Ellen is now an adult and appears to be living a happy life with her husband, Thomas. One morning, she awakens from another nightmare. Although Thomas does his best to comfort her, Ellen remains troubled by a lingering sense of unease, as if something terrible is waiting for her in the future. Meanwhile, Thomas is working hard to build a better future for the two of them. As a real estate agent, he works under a man named Knock. One day, Knock presents Thomas with what he believes is a life-changing opportunity. A wealthy nobleman named Count Orlok is interested in purchasing a house in Wisburg. However, in order to complete the transaction, Thomas must travel a great distance to Count's castle, located in the remote region of Transylvania. At first, Thomas is hesitant because the journey is long and filled with risks. But after Knock promises him a generous payment and the possibility of securing a permanent position at the company, Thomas eventually accepts the assignment for the sake of his future with Ellen.
A new husband requires new wages. He wishes to acquire a home here in our Visper. You needs must journey to him.
May not the Count execute the deed here?
Oh no, it is much too urgent. He lives in a small country.
And what was the Count's name?
Orlok. He will reward you handsomely, my boy, handsomely.
When he returns home and shares the news, Ellen immediately objects. For reasons she cannot explain, a terrible feeling continues to haunt her. She repeatedly begs Thomas to cancel the trip, but Thomas refuses, believing this is the greatest opportunity they have ever been given.
And I shall have to set off tomorrow, as it is a 6-week journey.
You cannot leave. You mustn't leave. I love you too much. It portends something awful for us.
As a keepsake during their separation, Ellen cuts a small lock of her hair that night and places it inside a locket to give to her husband. Elsewhere, Knock is seen performing a strange ritual by himself. While speaking to an unseen presence, he declares that all the preparations have been completed and that he is merely waiting for the arrival of his master. Although the identity of this mysterious figure remains unknown, it is clear that Knock is hiding a dark secret from everyone around him. The following day, Thomas finally begins his journey. Before leaving, he entrusts Ellen to the care of his close friend Friedrich and Friedrich's wife Anna. Although she tries to remain strong, Ellen cannot hide her anxiety as she watches her husband leave the city. After a long journey, Thomas eventually arrives at a small village in Transylvania. From the moment he sets foot there, he notices that the villagers seem frightened and reluctant to speak with him. Their expressions change immediately when Thomas mentions Count Orlok and explains the purpose of his visit. Since it is already late, Thomas only intends to spend the night there before continuing his journey the next morning. However, the innkeeper becomes visibly terrified when he learns that Thomas plans to visit Count's castle. The man repeatedly warns him to abandon the trip, insisting that the castle is not a place anyone should ever visit. At first, the innkeeper even refuses to rent him a room. Nevertheless, Thomas remains determined to continue his mission. After offering to pay twice the normal price, he finally convinces the innkeeper to let him stay for the night.
Pentru un vis rău, nu există logute numere acolo.
The next morning, Thomas is shocked to discover that the village, which had seemed lively the night before, is now completely deserted. Not a single person is in sight, and even his horse has disappeared. With no other choice, Thomas is forced to continue the remainder of his journey on foot. As night falls, a mysterious carriage suddenly emerges from the darkness and stops directly in front of Thomas. What makes the sight even more unsettling is the fact that there is no driver controlling it. Despite his growing unease, Thomas eventually climbs aboard because it's the only way to reach his destination. Not long afterward, the carriage comes to a stop in front of the towering Castle Count. Carefully stepping down, Thomas enters the ancient structure. However, only moments after crossing the threshold, the massive door behind him suddenly slams shut on its own. Standing before him is a nobleman named Count Orlok. Clearly displeased, Count immediately scolds Thomas for arriving late. Feeling embarrassed, Thomas quickly apologizes and follows the nobleman into a grand hall prepared for dinner. Count wastes no time getting down to business and insists that Thomas complete the property documents that very night. However, because the room is so dimly lit, Thomas struggles to see clearly and suggests finishing everything the following morning instead. Unfortunately, Count rejects the idea and firmly orders Thomas to do as he is told. As their conversation continues, Thomas begins noticing several strange things about him. Even when Count pours him a drink, Thomas cannot take his eyes off the nobleman's unnaturally long and unsettling fingers. During dinner, Thomas accidentally cuts his finger with a knife, causing it to bleed. Strangely, Count asks him to sit by the fireplace, claiming that he can help ease the pain. However, after sitting down, Thomas begins sweating heavily, and it is at that moment that he realizes something is terribly wrong with the man before him.
Drink, eat. Take it.
The following morning, Thomas awakens on the castle floor in a state of confusion. He can barely remember anything that happened after dinner. While searching the castle for someone, he discovers a strange wound on his chest that resembles a bite mark. The discovery leaves him increasingly alarmed as he realizes something must have happened while he was unconscious. Through a flashback, the truth about the previous night is finally revealed. After the property contract is signed, Count presents Thomas with another document written in an ancient language that he cannot understand. Weak and disoriented, Thomas is forced to sign it without knowing its contents.
Now are we?
Count also takes the locket given to him by Ellen. Holding the locket in his hand, he remarks that Thomas is fortunate to possess true love. He then hands Thomas a pouch filled with gold coins as part of their agreement. Sensing that something is terribly wrong, Thomas immediately asks to return home. However, Count refuses and claims that traveling while ill would bring misfortune. After saying this, he leaves while taking Ellen's locket with him, leaving Thomas trapped inside a castle that now feels more like a prison. Determined to escape, Thomas begins searching for a way out. Yet, no matter where he goes, every door remains locked. While exploring a neglected section of the castle, he discovers a dark passageway leading deep beneath the building. Hoping it might lead to freedom, Thomas follows the passage until he reaches a hidden chamber containing a large coffin covered in strange carvings. Driven by curiosity, he opens the coffin and is horrified to find Count lying inside. Suddenly, Count rises from the coffin, terrifying Thomas. At the same time, Count is seen using Ellen's locket to establish a connection with her despite the great distance separating them. Through this connection, he tells Ellen that Thomas will soon be taken away from her. It is here that a major secret is finally revealed. The mysterious entity that answered Ellen's call when she was young was none other than Count himself. At the same time, Thomas finally understands the horrifying truth. The man he has been dealing with is not an ordinary nobleman, but a vampire. The bite mark on his chest serves as proof that Count fed on his blood during the previous night. Meanwhile, Ellen's condition in Visburg continues to grow increasingly alarming. Friedrich catches her sleepwalking without any awareness of what she is doing. Fearing that something terrible might happen, he immediately calls a doctor named Dr. Sievers to examine her. After observing her symptoms, Dr. Sievers suspects that Ellen is suffering from a severe sleep disorder. He even suggests that if her condition worsens, she may need to be restrained to prevent herself from unknowingly harming herself. While they are discussing the situation, Ellen suddenly begins groaning and appears restless in her sleep. In an attempt to calm her down, Dr. Sievers administers a sedative so she can rest more peacefully. Meanwhile, Thomas, who has just awakened, finds himself being chased by several vicious beasts. With no other option, he desperately climbs out of a castle window and throws himself into the river below. The following day, Dr. Sievers receives news about a patient with extremely unusual behavior who has recently been brought to the hospital. Curious, he immediately goes to examine him. To his shock, the patient turns out to be Nock, Thomas's employer. The man is completely different from how he used to be. He appears insane and is surrounded by animal carcasses. Throughout his disturbing behavior, Nock repeatedly claims that his master will soon arrive. When Dr. Sievers attempts to speak with him, Nock suddenly devours a bird in front of everyone. When questioned about the identity of this master, Nock refuses to give a clear answer. Instead, he becomes aggressive and attacks the doctor.
He's coming.
Who is?
You're firing!
That same night, Ellen's condition worsens once again. Her body suddenly convulses and she repeatedly mutters that the figure is coming.
Help me.
This causes Dr. Sievers to suspect that Ellen's strange condition may somehow be connected to Nock's bizarre behavior. Realizing that the case is beyond his expertise, he advises Friedrich to seek help from a far more experienced specialist, his former mentor, Dr. Albin. Meanwhile, Thomas is discovered unconscious on the riverbank by a group of nuns. They bring him to a church and tend to his injuries. After regaining consciousness, the nuns warn Thomas that he has encountered an extremely dangerous evil force. They even urge him to remain at the church, believing that the holy place can protect him from whatever is pursuing him.
I promised I'd join the firm. I came here to sell the Count a house. I must leave. I promised Ellen.
Remain here. You are lost. In his shadow, a black enchanter he was in life. His evil cannot enter this house of God.
However, Thomas is far too worried about Ellen. Convinced that something terrible is happening to his wife, he decides to return home immediately, despite not having fully recovered. Not long afterward, Friedrich and Dr. Sievers arrive at Dr. Albin's home to ask for his assistance. The moment he sees his former student, Albin warmly welcomes them. Yet before they can explain why they have come, Albin somehow guesses that they are dealing with a young woman who is experiencing strange events that cannot be explained medically. His accurate prediction leaves both Friedrich and Dr. Sievers stunned, as though he already knows exactly what they are facing. At the same time, Thomas manages to obtain a horse and immediately begins his journey back to Visburg. Unbeknownst to him, however, a far greater threat is also making its way toward the city. Count is now traveling hidden inside a coffin, being transported aboard a merchant ship. At first, the voyage appears normal, but before long, a series of horrifying events begins to unfold. The crew members start falling ill one by one. Many of them suffer from terrible symptoms before dying without any apparent cause. The situation grows even worse when large numbers of rats begin appearing throughout the ship. Seeing this, the captain starts to suspect that they may be carrying a deadly plague. Elsewhere, Friedrich, Dr. Sievers, and Dr. Alban gather to discuss the worsening situation in the city. The rats filling the streets have begun spreading disease, while the number of victims continues to rise each day. Friedrich still tries to find a rational explanation for everything that is happening. However, Dr. Alban sees things differently. According to him, not everything can be explained through science. Sometimes people must accept that certain things exist beyond human understanding. It is then that Alban reveals his suspicion that the plague spreading throughout the city is not the only threat they face. Something far more dangerous arrived with that ship. Alban explains that the creature is known as Nosferatu, an ancient vampire that survives by feeding on human blood and leaves death wherever it goes. The explanation sounds impossible to Friedrich, but with every new tragedy that unfolds, the theory becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. Meanwhile, in the middle of the night, Ellen suddenly awakens from her sleep. The moment she opens her eyes, she finds Count standing before her. The vampire's appearance fills her with fear. Calmly, Count reminds her of the past she has spent years trying to forget. He tells her that everything began because of her, because many years ago, she was the one who called him out of the darkness. Now that he has found his way back to her, he has come to claim the bond that was formed between them. Count also reveals that Thomas signed a contract that unknowingly tied him to the vampire in exchange for the rewards he had been promised. Ellen refuses to believe him, but Count insists that everything he says is true. Even so, he makes it clear that he will not force her. The decision belongs entirely to Ellen. She is free to either accept him or reject him. Before disappearing, Count gives her 3 days to make her choice.
I was but an innocent child. You cannot love.
I will leave you 3 nights.
However, he also warns that if she refuses, Thomas and the people of Wisburg will suffer the consequences. Moments later, Ellen suddenly jolts awake. At first, she believes it was all just a nightmare, but when she looks beside her, she sees Anna lying weakly on the floor while several rats wander nearby. The following day, conditions in the city continue to deteriorate. Hospitals are overwhelmed with sick and desperate people seeking help. The doctors struggle to keep up as more patients arrive every hour. At the same time, Anna's condition grows increasingly concerning. When Friedrich visits her, she confesses that she feels something strange happening inside her body. She says it feels as though she is slowly becoming someone else and no longer recognizes herself. Her words leave Friedrich even more worried, as it appears that the plague spreading throughout Wisburg is beginning to affect the people closest to him one by one. Amid the growing chaos, Ellen tries to warn Friedrich that the horrifying events devastating their city are not merely a coincidence. She's convinced that a great danger is approaching and that it will claim even more lives if they do not act quickly. However, Friedrich, exhausted both physically and emotionally, finally loses his patience. In his eyes, Ellen has become the source of all the misfortunes that have plagued his family. Consumed by anger and despair, he orders both Ellen and Thomas to leave his house and never return. Although Ellen desperately pleads with him, explaining that Thomas is still weak and that they have nowhere else to go, Friedrich refuses to listen. In the end, Ellen has no choice but to take her husband back to their own home.
You must hear me. There is something. An infernal creature. What of Anna? Did you not see her?
You and Thomas, both of you, to return her.
Please.
Throw her at her, please.
After keeping her secret buried for so many years, Ellen finally reveals her entire past to Thomas. She confesses that when she was younger and consumed by unbearable loneliness, she became involved with the being they now know as Count. At first, Ellen believed his presence could fill the emptiness in her life. However, over time, that relationship transformed into something horrifying and bound her to a darkness she could never escape. The confession deeply shocks Thomas. It is difficult for him to accept that everything happening around them can be traced back to his wife's past. Even so, despite his disappointment and heartbreak, Thomas chooses to remain by Ellen's side because his love for her is greater than the pain he feels. Not long after their conversation, Ellen begins suffering another violent seizure.
I should send Dr. Sievers.
In a half-conscious state, she says something that deeply wounds Thomas, claiming that he could never satisfy her the way Count did. Yet Thomas realizes that his wife is not truly speaking as herself. He sees a woman struggling against the influence of a dark force that has haunted her for years. For that reason, instead of turning away from her, Thomas reassures Ellen that no matter what happens, he will never abandon her. He promises that he will remain by her side until all of these nightmares finally come to an end.
You could never please me as he could.
I love you! I love you!
Kill him, I will.
She'll never harm you again.
He will murder you if I do not go to him.
You're safe with me. It's me. It's me.
Elsewhere, Dr. Alban continues searching through ancient records and forgotten research in an effort to find a way to stop the terror brought by Count. After countless hours of study, he finally uncovers a crucial piece of information. Nosferatu, or a vampire, cannot be destroyed through ordinary means. The creature can only be defeated if a woman who shares a bond with it willingly lures it into staying by her side until sunrise. Once the first rays of sunlight touch Nosferatu's body, the creature will lose its power and be destroyed forever. However, this method comes at a terrible cost, as the person carrying it out will most likely have to sacrifice her own life. Dr. Alban immediately realizes that, of everyone involved, only Ellen is capable of doing such a thing. In other words, the fate of the entire city now rests in her hands. That same night, another tragedy strikes. Anna awakens after hearing screams coming from her children's room. Since Friedrich remains asleep and unaware of what is happening, Anna rushes to check on them alone. However, when she enters the room, she discovers that Count has already attacked her children. Despite knowing she stands no chance against such a creature, Anna desperately tries to protect them. The following day, a deep sense of mourning spreads throughout Visburg. Anna and her 2 daughters become the latest victims of the vampire's reign of terror. Friedrich, who had once refused to believe Ellen's warnings, is now forced to face the devastating reality that his family has been taken from him. After the funeral, the group gathers once again to discuss their next move. There is no longer any doubt that Count must be stopped before even more lives are lost. During the meeting, Dr. Alban reveals that he has finally discovered the vampire's hiding place. According to his plan, they will travel there that very night and destroy the sarcophagus Count uses as his resting place. Without it, Count will have nowhere to hide when the sun rises. Ellen wants to join the mission, but Thomas immediately refuses. After everything that has happened, he cannot bear the thought of placing her in danger again. Thomas even swears that he will personally confront Count and put an end to everything. However, after the meeting concludes, Dr. Alban speaks privately with Ellen. Both of them understand a truth that Thomas does not know. Destroying the sarcophagus or attacking Count directly will most likely not be enough to stop him. The only way to truly defeat Nosferatu is to carry out the sacrifice described in the ancient records. Ellen understands exactly what that means and accepts the possibility that she may have to give up her own life to save the people she loves. Knowing that Thomas would never allow such a plan, Dr. Alban decides to keep it a secret. He intends to keep Thomas occupied on the chosen night while Ellen carries out the task that only she can accomplish.
Only you have the faculty to redeem us. I will keep your husband at bay tonight. Go now, go home.
Ellen, let us make haste.
That afternoon, Thomas goes looking for Friedrich. However, when he arrives at Friedrich's house, he is nowhere to be found. Unbeknownst to him, Friedrich is at his family's gravesite. Losing his wife and 2 daughters in such a short period of time has completely shattered his life. Not long afterward, Thomas, Dr. Sievers, and Dr. Alban eventually arrive at the cemetery as well. But upon reaching the site, they discover that Friedrich has died beside his wife's coffin. The loss of his family has left him with no reason to keep living. Seeing his friend meet such a tragic fate fills Thomas with sorrow. Even so, they have little time to mourn because Count is still at large, continuing to spread death throughout Visburg. After taking care of Friedrich and Anna's remains, they immediately continue with their plan to stop the vampire before more lives are lost.
There is a chapel beyond the courtyard.
Meanwhile, the 3rd night finally arrives. It is the night Count has been waiting for and also the deadline he gave Ellen to make her choice. At the same time, having accepted her fate, Ellen stands beside her bedroom window and calls for Count to come to her. Elsewhere, Thomas, Dr. Sievers, and Dr. Alban finally arrive at the abandoned house that Count has been using as his hiding place. They make their way through dark rooms filled with rats before eventually finding the vampire's sarcophagus. Without wasting any time, they immediately open it. Believing that Count is inside, Thomas instantly attacks the figure lying within. However, moments later, they realize that the person inside the sarcophagus is not Count at all, but Nock, the devoted servant who has faithfully served the vampire all this time. The discovery leaves Thomas shocked and panicked because he immediately realizes that Count is somewhere else. It is then that Dr. Alban finally reveals the truth he has been hiding. He explains that destroying the sarcophagus will not be enough to kill Count. The only way to end everything is through the sacrifice they discussed earlier. Upon hearing this, Thomas finally understands why Alban brought him there in the first place. Ellen has been deliberately left alone to face Count so that she can carry out the plan they have prepared. Thomas is immediately consumed by anger as he realizes that his wife is risking her life. However, Alban insists that there is no other way. If they want to save Visburg, the sacrifice must happen. Alban begins setting Count's hiding place on fire so that the vampire will no longer have any refuge, while Thomas and Dr. Sievers rush back in the hope that they can still save Ellen. Meanwhile, Ellen waits for Count's arrival in her room, dressed in the wedding gown she has prepared. Not long afterward, Count finally appears. The vampire still wants to make sure that Ellen is choosing this path of her own free will. In order to save the people she loves, Ellen accepts Count's presence without resistance. Believing that he has finally obtained what he has desired for so long, Count focuses all of his attention on Ellen. Unaware that he is being lured into a trap, he remains by her side and slowly begins feeding on her blood. While Count is completely consumed by his obsession with Ellen, he fails to notice that the night is coming to an end. Eventually, the first rays of sunlight begin shining through the bedroom window. Only then does Count realize that it is too late. His body starts losing its strength and gradually crumbles beneath the sunlight. After spreading death and suffering for so long, Count finally meets his end. Not long afterward, Thomas arrives in the room. Having lost too much blood, Ellen is already in critical condition. She takes her final breath after successfully saving the city of Visburg from the terror of Nosferatu forever. Thanks to her courage, the curse hanging over the city has finally come to an end, and the plague that brought death to Visburg no longer threatens its people. Although the city has been saved and the nightmare is finally over, Thomas is left heartbroken after losing the woman he loves, and with that, the story comes to an end.